I moved to Blossom Trail, a tidy neighborhood of pastel-colored homes and manicured lawns, hoping for a peaceful suburban life. The houses lined each side of the street with uniform mailboxes, each driveway adorned by a small bed of flowers. The Blossom Trail Homeowners Association boasted of a safe, well-organized community, with strict covenants to preserve property values and common areas. It seemed charming at first sight, offering exactly the stability I craved. The day I arrived, unloading boxes from a rented truck, a tall, middle-aged woman with a neatly cut blonde bob approached. She wore pressed khaki pants and a pastel blouse, clasping a thick clipboard. Her smile seemed cordial, though her gaze flicked over every detail. "Hello," she said. "I'm Karen Wheeler, president of our HOA. I trust you've read the rules about moving trucks not blocking driveways beyond 8 p.m. We like to keep the street clear." Her tone was polite, but carried an edge. I'd read about HOA Karens, the meme that combined HOA and Karen, referring to controlling neighbors. Hoping it was just an exaggeration, I smiled, nodding. She pressed a binder of bylaws into my hands. "We have high standards here," she insisted. "If you follow them, we'll get along fine." At the time, her seriousness struck me as overblown but harmless. Little did I suspect how aggressively she'd attempt to control every aspect of my life, or that she'd soon block Meals on Wheels volunteers from entering the neighborhood, labeled them as strangers trespassing, and eventually face humiliation on local TV. For now, I just wanted to settle in, believing that a carefully managed community might actually be nice. I was no stranger to volunteer work. For the last few years, I'd volunteered with Meals on Wheels, delivering pre-cooked meals to housebound seniors. My father once relied on them in his final months, so I knew firsthand how vital such deliveries could be for older adults who struggled to cook or shop. After moving to Blossom Trail, I learned there were seniors in the area who also received these deliveries, some living alone, often with limited mobility. The local Meals on Wheels branch asked if I'd be willing to host a small distribution point, especially since my house was centrally located, with easy street access. I happily agreed. We planned a simple routine. Each weekday around noon, 1 or 2 volunteer drivers from Meals on Wheels would stop by my driveway with insulated containers of meals. I'd help unload them, then distribute them to local volunteers who'd deliver them further into the neighborhood or to other nearby seniors. The entire process would take maybe 15 minutes, no large trucks or loud commotion, just a quick handoff of essential food. The seniors who lived within a block or two could even pick up their meals directly if they preferred, saving the volunteers a trip. Everyone saw it as a beneficial arrangement. It seemed so simple, so good-hearted. I never imagined it would rub Karen the wrong way. Within days of finalizing these plans, I placed a small sign at the edge of my driveway, Meals on Wheels drop-off, Mon to Friday, 11:45 a.m. to 12:15 p.m. The sign was discreet, just a modest board to help volunteers identify my house. The first day, a single volunteer van arrived with roughly a dozen boxed meals, quickly unloaded them to me, then left. The entire exchange was calm, no traffic jam, no disruption. My neighbors, including Ms. York across the street, waved approvingly, calling it a wonderful service. It felt uplifting to provide this small piece of help. But apparently, not everyone was pleased. That same afternoon, as the volunteer van pulled away, Karen's black SUV rolled onto the street. She parked at the curb, stepping out, arms folded. Her expression was rigid. "What's going on here?" she demanded. "I saw an unfamiliar vehicle unloading boxes. Are you running a commercial operation?" I explained politely that it was Meals on Wheels, a nonprofit delivering meals for seniors. I was simply acting as a volunteer drop-off point. She frowned deeper. "We don't allow random deliveries in this neighborhood, especially if they're not for residents. The roads must remain clear." I calmly reassured her it was a single van, briefly stopping. She asked if I had board approval for this activity. I said I didn't realize I needed one, since it was just a volunteer service, not a commercial enterprise or constant high-traffic event. Karen insisted that all organized activities in the neighborhood required prior HOA sanction. She warned me about fines for unapproved signs, pointing to the small Meals on Wheels sign in my yard. I tried explaining the sign was for volunteer guidance, but Karen cut me off. Remove it or the HOA will. We have strict guidelines on yard signage. She walked away, muttering about outsiders wandering in. A few days later, Karen left a formal letter in my mailbox: cease unauthorized deliveries. She claimed multiple neighbors complained about strange vehicles, potential security risks, and food trucks blocking the street. She demanded I halt the daily drop-offs or face fines. She offered no real evidence of complaints, though. That afternoon, a volunteer named Dave arrived for the meal drop. Karen was lurking in her SUV nearby. As soon as Dave stepped out with the meal containers, she approached, demanding identification. Dave, startled, explained he was from Meals on Wheels. She scolded him for trespassing on private HOA roads. Dave, shocked, turned to me. I told him not to worry, I'd handle it. Karen threatened to call the police if he continued illegal deliveries. Dave left quickly to avoid a scene, though he found her behavior bizarre. I felt outraged. The road was public enough that mail carriers, Amazon drivers, and food deliveries were common. Ms. York, from across the street, said she never heard neighbors complaining. She suspected Karen was the sole objector, just using her position to intimidate. I decided to call Ms. Jenkins, an HOA board member, explaining the situation. Ms. Jenkins apologized, saying the board as a whole hadn't taken a stance yet, but she personally found Karen's demands unreasonable. She suggested I attend the next board meeting to present my case. Meanwhile, I endured Karen's harassment daily. If her SUV was around, Dave or another volunteer had to drop off quickly, sometimes parking at Ms. York's driveway to avoid confrontation. Eventually, Ms. Jenkins told me Karen was planning to propose a formal ban on food distribution from private driveways. That was obviously targeting me. Ms. Jenkins promised to rally supportive neighbors. The new board meeting was a week away. Could the rest of the board see reason, or would Karen's influence overshadow them? Tension mounted. I dreaded each day's noon drop-off, worried Karen might escalate further. Indeed, she was about to. One Wednesday around noon, a volunteer driver named Lisa arrived with the usual meal packages. I stood by my driveway, ready to receive them. Suddenly, Karen's SUV sped up, parking diagonally, physically blocking Lisa from pulling into my driveway. Karen hopped out, arms raised, shouting, "No unauthorized deliveries here. Turn around and leave." Lisa was stunned, the van half in the street. She looked at me in confusion. I tried calmly telling Karen to move, that this was a short drop-off. Karen refused, claiming she had the right to block her own driveway space, though it wasn't even her house. The children's meals, sitting in insulated boxes, needed to be distributed quickly. Ms. York ran over, telling Karen she was causing an actual traffic hazard. Karen retorted that the van had no right to be there in the first place. An argument erupted. Lisa threatened to call the police if Karen wouldn't let her pass. Karen smirked, saying, "Go ahead. We'll see who's truly trespassing." Ms. York attempted reason, pointing out the volunteer had a legitimate purpose. Meanwhile, other neighbors came out to watch, some filming with phones. The standoff lasted a tense 5 minutes before Ms. Jenkins arrived, scolding Karen. Finally, Karen relented, reversing slightly. Lisa quickly drove onto my driveway, we offloaded the meals, and she left, shaken by the confrontation. The entire fiasco was humiliating. Word spread that Karen physically blocked a charitable volunteer van from delivering meals to seniors. Many neighbors were furious, especially those who valued community service. Ms. Jenkins pressed Karen to justify her actions. Karen repeated her security risk mantra. Ms. Jenkins called it outrageous. The next board meeting, just days away, promised fireworks. Meanwhile, I worried for the seniors who counted on those meals. If Karen kept blocking access, we might have to relocate the distribution. But that would mean the seniors in Blossom Trail missed easy pickups. I prayed the board would stand up to Karen's tyranny. At the monthly HOA board meeting, the hall was unusually full. A mix of curious residents, outraged neighbors, and a few local seniors who relied on Meals on Wheels. The board, Karen at the center, Ms. Jenkins, Mr. Howard, Ms. Wheeler, and Ms. Castillo, called the session to order. After routine business, the agenda moved to review of complaints regarding meal delivery van. Karen began with a prepared statement, citing alleged multiple neighbor complaints, fears of unknown drivers, and potential traffic blockages. She claimed the volunteer drop-offs were commercial-like activity, not sanctioned by the HOA. She proposed an immediate ban on meal distribution from private residences. The tension soared. Ms. Jenkins countered that the roads were public enough for deliveries and that the volunteer van caused no real congestion. She pointed out that many residents welcomed the service. Ms. Wheeler, referencing the common good, asked if the seniors who got these meals were indeed in need. I stood up, explaining the mission of Meals on Wheels, helping the homebound, providing nutrition to those who can't shop or cook. Ms. Yerk told the board how she observed no real disturbance, just a quick daily van arrival. Karen insisted none of that mattered. An official ban was necessary to preserve our quiet, exclusive environment. She presented no evidence of real disruption, only personal annoyance. Mr. Howard asked if any official complaints were filed. Karen had none. Ms. Jenkins then read a letter from a local senior praising the convenience of picking up meals from my driveway, stating how it helped them remain independent. Some neighbors applauded. When put to a vote, Karen's proposed ban failed 4-1, with Karen alone supporting it. Applause broke out among attendees, many standing to cheer. Karen looked stunned, her face reddening. Ms. Jenkins reaffirmed the board's position. I was free to continue hosting the meal drop-off. She asked Karen to cease harassing the volunteers. The session ended with Karen leaving abruptly, ignoring questions. I felt a wave of relief. We had won that round. Yet Karen's behavior in physically blocking the van had already drawn negative attention. The story was about to spread beyond the neighborhood. The day after that board meeting, a small local TV station's news van rolled into Blossom Trail. A reporter, hearing rumors of an HOA official blocking Meals on Wheels volunteers, arrived to investigate. She interviewed Ms. Jenkins, who described how the volunteers provided meals to seniors and how the HOA president had tried to stop it. They also spoke to Ms. York, who recounted the near standoff with Karen's SUV. Ms. Banks, an elderly recipient of the meals, tearfully shared how important the service was to her. I was initially wary of being on camera, but Ms. York convinced me to speak, explaining that the public needed to know. I told the reporter how everything was done politely, legally, with minimal fuss, until Karen singled us out. The reporter asked if I had any official statements from Karen. I said I had no direct quotes, but she might approach Karen personally. Apparently, the reporter knocked on Karen's door that evening. Karen refused to comment, slamming the door. That gave the station a dramatic angle. HOA president declines interview after blocking Meals on Wheels. Ms. Jenkins told me the news piece would air the next day, painting Karen as a heartless official preventing seniors from getting food. She suspected the public outrage would be intense, possibly forcing Karen to back down once and for all. On a calm Thursday evening, the local station aired a short segment, Meals Blocked. HOA president sparks outrage by halting delivery in quiet suburb. The footage showed interviews with Ms. Jenkins, Ms. York, me, and a senior reliant on the meals. The reporter explained how a volunteer van was physically blocked by the HOA president, concluding that the board had overruled her attempt to ban the service. The piece ended with the line, Karen Wheeler, the HOA president, declined our request for comment. That night, social media lit up with condemnation. Neighbors posted links to the story, calling Karen's act heartless, shameful, un-American. Even some who'd once supported her approach to strict landscaping parted ways with her. They realized meddling with a charity that fed the elderly crossed a moral line. Ms. Jenkins said her phone was buzzing with residents wanting Karen removed or forced to apologize publicly. Karen, humiliated, avoided the public eye for days. She posted a short message on the HOA forum claiming the news story was biased and that she only sought to maintain property values and security. The replies were scathing, with neighbors pointing out she had no authority to block a charity van. Some demanded she resign. Others wrote that property values drop when an HOA is known for harassing seniors. Ms. Jenkins revealed that multiple seniors' families were considering a recall petition, calling Karen an embarrassment. Meanwhile, the meal deliveries continued daily, unimpeded. The volunteers came, dropped off, and left quickly. The tension had dissolved, replaced by a sense of triumph among neighbors who valued compassion. Ms. Jenkins told me the next official board meeting might see a push to remove Karen from office. Karen's power base had evaporated. The entire fiasco, culminating in negative press coverage, left her standing alone. Sure enough, a special session was called by the HOA board the following week. The posted agenda read, "Discussion of HOA President's misuse of authority regarding Meals on Wheels volunteers." Word spread. The same local news reporter indicated interest in attending. Karen must have sensed an impending showdown. The community center was jam-packed that evening. Ms. Jenkins and 3 other board members sat behind a table, with Karen occupying the center seat. The rest of us filled rows of folding chairs, hush descending as Ms. Jenkins opened the session. She cited numerous resident complaints about Karen's attempt to ban or block the meal deliveries, culminating in that TV news story which tarnished the neighborhood's reputation. Karen looked stiff, scanning the crowd. Ms. Jenkins recapped how the board had voted against banning the deliveries. She reminded everyone that Karen personally blocked the van, threatened volunteers, and tried to adopt new rules unilaterally. This, Ms. Jenkins argued, was an abuse of the president's power. The audience listened, tension thick. Then Ms. Jenkins invited me to speak. I recounted the emotional toll, how volunteers felt frightened to do a charitable act, how seniors worried their meals might be cut off. Ms. Yerk also spoke, describing the day Karen parked her SUV as a barricade. The board members conferred, each quietly condemning Karen's reckless behavior. Karen was allowed to defend herself. She insisted she was looking out for the neighborhood's interest, that unfamiliar vans roamed in daily, which could pose a danger. She blamed the news station for portraying her as a villain. But her words rang hollow. The crowd, swayed by Ms. Jenkins's evidence, was unsympathetic. Many jeered or murmured disapproval. One senior shouted, "We rely on those meals. How dare you block them?" Another demanded her resignation. Finally, Ms. Jenkins declared they'd hold an immediate vote among the board members on whether to remove Karen from the presidency for gross misconduct. The result, 4-1 in favor of removing her. Karen alone voted against. Applause erupted. Ms. Jenkins also called for a membership vote to confirm the decision. The membership, who had come out in large numbers, voted overwhelmingly to uphold the board's removal. The final tally was read. Karen was stripped of her title and authority, effective immediately. Ms. Jenkins hammered her gavel, concluding the session. Karen, face flushed, marched out, ignoring the calls for an apology. The local reporter captured the moment, likely for a follow-up segment titled something like, "HOA President Ousted After Meals on Wheels Controversy." A wave of relief swept the crowd. Ms. Jenkins promised a formal letter to reassure volunteers that the HOA fully supported them. Thus ended Karen Wheeler's reign as HOA president. The official punishment was swift and severe. Immediate removal from her leadership post, with no chance of reinstatement. Public humiliation via the local news coverage, labeling her as a heartless official interfering with charity. Social ostracism in Blossom Trail. Neighbors largely disavowed her, seeing her as petty, controlling, and cruel. No criminal charges were filed, as volunteers declined to press charges for harassment. But the moral condemnation was enough. Freed from Karen's tyranny, the board reaffirmed that my driveway was an authorized drop-off point for Meals on Wheels, urging the entire neighborhood to celebrate philanthropic endeavors, not obstruct them. Ms. Jenkins apologized to me on behalf of the association, praising the volunteer spirit that overcame Karen's meddling. In the following weeks, Karen retreated from community life. She rarely attended board meetings, had no influence on policy. Rumor had it she might sell her house. Some neighbors glimpsed her occasionally, but none greeted her warmly. The entire fiasco ended her illusions of reigning over Magnolia Ridge. The Karen of the HOA, who once believed she could dictate everything from lawn decorations to charitable operations, faced a well-deserved downfall. As for the Meals on Wheels service, it continued seamlessly. The volunteers arrived daily, dropping off meals for local seniors who cherished the convenience. No more confrontations marred the routine. Miss Jenkins even organized a small event in my driveway one afternoon, celebrating the volunteers who brought nourishment to those in need. The sense of community soared. People realized an HOA was meant to facilitate neighbors' well-being, not hamper it. Karen's punishment was final, dethroned, shunned, and overshadowed by the unstoppable good of a caring neighborhood. Ending with Karen punished. And so, Karen Wheeler met her rightful end as HOA president, undone by her attempt to block Meals on Wheels. Publicly humiliated by a local news expose and forcibly removed by the board, she lost every ounce of authority she once wielded. The neighborhood breathed easier without her overbearing rule, while the essential meal deliveries for seniors continued unabated, proof that empathy and communal good will always outshine petty authoritarianism.